In a small, quiet village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a blind man named Elias. Despite his inability to see, Elias had an extraordinary gift. He could hear the world in ways others could only imagine. His hearing was so keen that he could distinguish the rustling of leaves from the fluttering of a bird's wings, the distant laughter of children from the quiet murmurs of the river. Elias was a kind man, known to everyone in the village. Though he couldn't see, he knew the village like the back of his hand. He would walk through the narrow, cobblestone streets with confidence, his cane tapping lightly against the ground, greeting everyone he passed by name. One day, word spread through the village that a stranger had arrived. The stranger was a traveler, tall and cloaked in a dark, flowing robe, his face hidden beneath the hood. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was deep and smooth, like velvet. The villagers were curious about him, but also wary. There was something about the man that set him apart, something that made them uneasy. Elias, as usual, was the first to approach the newcomer. He walked up to the man, his cane tapping softly in the dirt, and greeted him warmly. The stranger looked at Elias with surprise, as if he could hardly believe the blind man had come to him without fear. "You are not afraid of me, old man?" the stranger asked, his voice tinged with amusement. Elias smiled. "I cannot see you, but I can hear your voice. And your voice tells me you are a man like any other. Why should I be afraid?" The stranger was silent for a moment. Then he chuckled softly. "You are a wise man, Elias. But tell me, how do you know my name?" Elias tilted his head slightly, as if listening to the wind. "Names have a way of finding their way to my ears," he said cryptically. "And besides, I have a feeling you are not here by accident." The stranger seemed taken aback by Elias' words, but he said nothing more. He simply nodded and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of villagers. Days passed, and the stranger remained in the village. He kept to himself mostly, but he always seemed to be watching Elias from a distance, as if trying to figure out the blind man's secrets. The villagers, noticing this, began to grow suspicious. They whispered among themselves, wondering if the stranger was some kind of sorcerer or thief, come to bring harm to their village. Elias, however, remained calm. He continued his daily routines, never showing any sign of concern. But he could sense the tension growing among the villagers, and he knew something needed to be done. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Elias decided to confront the stranger. He found him sitting alone on a bench near the village square, his hood pulled low over his face. "Stranger," Elias said gently as he approached, "why do you hide from us?" The man looked up, his eyes hidden in shadow. "I hide from no one," he replied. "But it is not I who need to see clearly, Elias. It is you." Elias was silent for a moment, pondering the man's words. Then he spoke softly. "You carry a burden, don't you? Something that weighs heavy on your heart." The stranger stiffened, and Elias could hear the faint tremor in his voice when he replied, "You know nothing of my burdens, old man." Elias reached out and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Perhaps not," he said quietly, "but I do know that the heart is a heavy thing to carry alone." For the first time, the stranger looked directly at Elias, and though Elias could not see, he felt the intensity of the man's gaze. "I have seen many things in this world," the stranger whispered, "things that would make even the bravest man cower in fear. I have walked in darkness for so long that I have forgotten what it means to live in the light." Elias nodded, his face serene. "Then let go of the darkness, my friend. Let it fall away and embrace the light once more." The stranger stared at Elias, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached up and pulled back his hood, revealing a face worn by years of hardship, but still handsome in its own way. His eyes, however, were what caught Elias' attention the most. They were not the eyes of a villain or a thief, but the eyes of a man who had seen too much, suffered too much. "You do not judge me," the stranger said, his voice filled with wonder. "Why?" Elias smiled softly. "I do not need to see you to know that you are a good man at heart. And every man deserves a chance at redemption. Tears welled up in the stranger's eyes as he looked at Elias, and for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, he thought, this blind man could see more clearly than anyone else in the village. That night, the stranger left the village, but not before he sought out Elias one last time. He found the old man sitting by his small, cozy home, listening to the sounds of the night. "I owe you a debt of gratitude, Elias," the stranger said quietly. Elias shook his head. "You owe me nothing. Just remember that there is always light, even in the darkest of places." The stranger nodded, and with that, he disappeared into the night, leaving the village and its people behind. As the years went by, the villagers spoke less and less of the mysterious stranger, and life returned to its peaceful rhythm. But Elias never forgot the man who had come to him in the twilight of his life, a man who had been lost in darkness, but had found his way back to the light. And though Elias remained blind, he continued to see the world in his own unique way, listening to the sounds of life around him, and knowing that even the blind could lead the way for those who had lost their sight.